Hey everybody, welcome back. So today I think that starting off on fraternities, societies, and lodges would be a good idea. These clustered groups that tell you you are a member of their organization and not a member of your local community or your state or your country are in the service of people who divide and conquer. And it's no coincidence that there's so many humiliation rituals and hazing and deaths and rapes that take place in fraternities and sororities and things like that. It's definitely not a nice place to do nice things. And I very much love it how, in a lot of fiction that takes inspiration from the real world, a lot of times secret societies are the focal point for the antagonistic theme. And that's very on point with reality, even if people like to translate things into a fantasy in order to help distribute them better to a wider audience without going, oh, here's reality and you should be scared of it and it's right there and yada yada yada. It's much better to get people, well, like the ancient Greeks, thinking higher than even the beautiful things that have been created in front of them, consistently always trying to strive and strive and strive to better themselves. Interesting that we're talking about past. It's um, the third or second main world religion behind animism is ancestor worship. And ancestor worship is a very interesting thing that is translated into veneration of the Virgin Mary as the world's mother, and also even back farther than that, Sky Father or Tengri or Zeus. And actually, you translate Zeus from Greek into Spanish and it becomes Deus, funny enough. That is the father, the eternal father for all people, or at least of society's people. Now, you see the Virgin Mary and Jesus depicted in a variety of different races, looking a variety of different ways. And frankly, I don't think that detracts from it at all, because the archetype is such that they are the new Adam and Eve. Um, and that is supposed to redeem us from our fallen state, mourning and weeping, and inspire us to no longer sacrifice animals or people on the altar of tomorrow, but instead look at the beauty of today, knowing that the blood has already been shed, and the tears have already been shed, and the sacrifice has already been made, and it is aligned with all the old world religions. And then the three kings from the three wise men from Zoroastrianism came over and took the world's most advanced religion, Zoroastrianism at the time, and bowed, like in The Lion King, bowed to the baby Christ and helped him, protected him, despite the fact that they were trying to kill all the babies at the time to prevent the Savior from being born that had been predicted for a very long time. So it's not just about Christianity. There's a lot of correspondence to prophecies that have taken place for thousands of years prior to the coming of Christ. And so that's where you get barrow mounds where people collectively put their ancestors, because in the old world conceptualization, especially in the Indo-European conceptualization, they very likely borrowed from the reincarnation picked up in proto-Hinduism, maybe proto-Sanskrit, sort of Indus Valley group culture, bigger macro culture. They've likely picked up reincarnation of some sort from that, and that's actually very, very evident in the European people compared to the Mediterranean people who believed in concepts of Sheol and Hades and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, the concept of purgatory is a synthesis of these two things. So People used to think that if they weren't interred in the same burial mounds as their ancestors, then they would never see them again in this life or the next. And it's very nice for the sacrifice to have been done in the Middle East, yet still ring through to the entirety of the earth. Like, Christ did well by all people, and that's why throughout all the tests of time, it has not only been maintained, but has been maintained through the scientific process to the point where it is the most pragmatically realistic of the religions that we have weeded out, from Islam to various types of Buddhism that have various types of interpretations of the afterlife, to Hinduism, which is like 5,000 different religions. I've studied the Kama Sutra, and it's not just about sex moves. It's actually about how to live as a countryman. To be a citizen in a Hinduist society is to follow the Kama Sutra, and the Kama Sutra is basically like a whole bunch of laws set up in like spokes of a wheel, so that if you align all these spokes properly, that the wheel of society turns. And that entire Dharma wheel concept is very likely where the wheel was invented in India, the cart brought up from Indus Valley, attached to horses, brought into Europe, just causing this absolute, economic and animal husbandry powerhouse of Europe. But incorruptibility of the body, which is something that Christians, Catholics especially, preach to this day, that Protestants in general tend to reject because it's not pragmatically realistic, and there's no physical evidence of incorruptibility of the body. That's literally the same sort of wax, polymer preservation techniques that they used on Chinese prisoners and tour around the United States to terrify people. It's no different. And the more realistic form of incorruptibility is to get yourself in such of a state that the bacteria in your body has been suppressed by not eating for so long and meditating and being in the cold and dry, to the point where your body doesn't break down when you die. And then afterwards, your body is kept in such a way that your body doesn't break down for long periods of time. Those are the mummies in the Tibetan monasteries of old. Mummified, they were entombed, and then they would ring a bell consistently to let people know that they were still alive. And when the bell stopped, they unentombed them and they brought them back out. That is where the concept of incorruptibility comes from. It's an old misconceptualization that if you were a very, very holy person, that your physical body wouldn't be destroyed. And that's a carryover from poorly conceptualized faith. And, you have artists depicting people popping out of their graves. That's just art. That's not real. I'm sorry. Necromancy is very likely just a tall tale, and the real necromancy spoken of in the Old Testament and practiced by the healers in the Middle East wasn't necromancy. It was likely reviving people from near death with very, at the time, cutting edge medical techniques. And there is a lot of things that people can do. People who are very intelligent, people who have a very high charisma, that science can barely explain, but it explains through a psychosomatic link of people believing and faith and charisma. And that's something that's very, very interesting about these sorts of miraculous healing things that are talked about. And I believe that miraculous healing is the basis of necromancy. But naturally, like your spirit and your soul, we're amphibians in that we are 50% world, 50% immortal spirit. And Satan hates that. He despises that because we are still we're dirty creatures of the earth, but we're still of God. We are our creations. And I personally believe that every living animal is part and parcel to a portion of that. But yeah, I'll pop off that and get into something I've been thinking about a lot recently in regards to why these freaks shoot up schools. And they are freaks, but they have been driven to that point, usually by grooming online on Discords and through horrible, horrible websites. And um, it, over time, as you pour demons into people, originally, you see, anybody who says Jack Dorsey is like freedom guy, he is not freedom guy. I mean, unless you consider freedom to traumatize children with ISIS beheading videos and show porn to 13-year-olds, that's Jack Dorsey's version of freedom. And that is not right. And Elon Musk has done a lot better job with X than Jack Dorsey did with Twitter. I mean, it's like, I'm sorry, anybody who knows their history knows exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody who knows their history about Discord knows exactly what I'm talking about. And through these, you know, you get somebody alone when in their room when they're vulnerable at the end of a stressful school day, and then you batter them with all this hatred of the world and all these cherry-picked things about people, and then eventually that causes them to become vessels for demonic possession. And in that they be told by these demons that the only way that they'll be worth anything in society is if they're remembered, and the only way they'll be remembered is if they do, you know, terrible things. And this concept isn't new. It's called herostroti. Herostroti. Not hero, herostroti. And it's named after a man who burned down the seventh wonder of the world just for attention-seeking behavior. And anybody who does such a thing now from now on is called herostroti. Officio damnerete. So it's unfortunate that these people, when their lives flash before their eyes, they will see truly how their egos lied to them and how the demonic possession took advantage of their potential and dragged, as if in a cage, their inner child along down to hell. And they will weep, and their lives will flash before their eyes in a misery of absolution. But well, unfortunately, a lot of these people are put on medication from a young age, and this is a lot of times where this starts. And this is why I say, you know, I mentioned Jordan Peterson and psychiatrists, not psychologists, psychiatrists who prescribe medication, and how that it has been shoehorned into child psychology, and child psychiatry shouldn't be a thing. It really should not be a term, child psychiatry. That's sick. But SSRIs and ADHD medication really do. They pound and pound and pound at the sensitive interior parts of people's psyches and do physical damage to people's brains. But on top of that, it's really bad for people's psyches. And then when they're hallucinating and all this, they don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. And so they can be manipulated this way and the third. And if you're a parent and you care about your child and you're not lazy and disgusting, you should never wish that for them. But if you're a lazy, disgusting POS, you should probably find like a family member to give your child to before you consider medicating them and ruining their lives. It's very hard to pull out of that once you're consecrated to the pharmaceutical industries like that. Anyways, let's get off that topic. Let's talk about something silly. Let's talk about Ataturk. The Ataturk and the Young Turks who did the Armenian genocide in Turkey and stole up all the Ottoman Empire's efforts into its administrative capital of Turkey and its stolen city of Constantinople that they've called Istanbul. Well, in that stolen city, there's a place called Miniaturk, and they have a whole bunch of miniaturized world architectures, and that's where they have a miniaturized temple of Artemis that herostroti burned down. I'm sure they have the Eiffel Tower and stuff like that, because it's very easy to make a Eiffel Tower miniature. But Ataturk was on some Walt Disney shit. He really was. And for what, really? Because right now, if you've studied, we'll get into Operation Gladio later, because it's very important to understanding how the Freemasons got into the Vatican and turned it into a child sex trafficking ring, which it wasn't before. And if you have the inclination that it was, I'm going to knock your teeth out. But Operation Gladio was a stay-behind military CIA operation that was meant to take over large portions of the Mediterranean and have stay-behind militaries in Naples. And this is very connected to the Sicilian crime families, Naples Concrete Companies, Naples Waste Management, and the Vatican. and Florence and Milan as well have administrative ties to this. Um, Operation Gladio was also very heavily invested in Turkey, and Turkey is apparently the only place where it is still active. And so, the CIA seems to love Turkey more than any other country. Keep that in mind when you think that your government just has it out for Muslims. It's not about the religion. It's not about the money. It's about the power. It's not about the religion. It's about the control. Okay? All right. So, don't ever eat empty calories. Let hunger be a good currency, and take that currency to the kitchen and put it into making beautiful and inspiring things for you and your family and whoever you live with. That is good advice. Sharpen your skills in the kitchen. That is, take the things that God has created and we have cultivated, and turn it into more beauty through your naturopathic skill, and practice that skill, because that's one of the most important thing in the world. Spraying stuff on stuff is not, as adults know, is not the be all end all. It's actually quite depressing, and it gets stuff in the air, and it makes you sick, and it's nasty, and that's allopathy, otherwise known as alchemical, uh, processing of problems. Instead, you need to process problems naturally, which is naturopathy. The alchemists have dreamed of herbicides just stopping God's creation and allowing for their machinations to not have plants grow into them and grow them apart, and have funguses break them down, and have water dissolve them. The alchemists have dreamed about this sort of locking in. And I believe that's ultimately where the real investment, the not cope investment, but the real investment in space comes from, because it represents, even though people can't live outside of gravity for more than 5 years without their circulatory systems breaking down and their eyes exploding and their hearts bursting, that it could prevent nature from corrupting any of the, well, in their version, but returning any of their materials back to the coffers of God instead of their bank accounts. And the real maker is the one who's in charge, not these false crafters who don't give credit where credit is due. And the best crafters do give credit where credit is due. Speaking of herbicides, people on the news and the media, they talk a lot about global sea level rises. Well, it's interesting that global sea level rises isn't as much of a thing as shore erosion. And here in Florida, shore erosion is really big because shore erosion is mostly prevented by mangroves not being cut down. Ron DeSantis was elected on an environmentalist platform, and he has overseen a absolute destruction of our shorelines, an absolute poisoning of our lagoons, a complete and utter clear cutting of so many forests. And he plans, and I already see him having these disgusting poorly constructed caterpillar machines outside of parks, just rearing to flatten them and to get rid of the water distribution, and so that everything floods for everybody else, and everybody has a bunch of problems, so that he can create his fancy little construction site and build his fancy little lodges. And if people let DeSantis do what he wants to do, which in our shitty democratic system, what choice do we have? Then you will see Florida completely destroyed in 40 years. Florida, which is a beautiful place, and has only been bad because of people like the Finders and the Tampa Mafia, and people like DeSantis and his Guantanamo Bay buddies, and all the Cuban immigrants who came over to the country because they wanted to make money instead of any sort of dedication to America and freedom, and especially Operation 40 and those freaks. We hold our beauty in contempt as it gets worn out and sun damaged, dirty, instead of viewing them as the blessings that they are. Oftentimes we take for granted all the good stuff that we're given by God. And eventually, over time, we start to notice its tatters and its wear and its sun damage, and we go, oh no, God has forsaken me. Very funny. Because the reality is we could have protected those things and used them much more effectively and where they belonged. Instead, we didn't appreciate them, and the fault is our own in this day and age for not finding out. We have to do better. We have to strive to do better. We have to strive to learn every single day, learn something new. Every single day, try to better yourself, gain more on that experience bar of your skills, and try to maximize that instead of just wasting time. Anything that's a waste of time are things that are going to be remembered when your life flashes before your eyes as just a separation from the goodness of potential and from all the blessings of God. Don't waste your time. So don't waste your time on politics. Don't waste your time on, meaningless TV, things like that. Don't waste your time thinking horrible thoughts and repeating bad things in your head. Find a way to make right the things that have been disorganized inside of yourself, and eventually you'll notice that your happiness will improve if you try and push your intellect to a more balanced and calm and peaceful state naturally. Gen X got it really bad. They got the worst of the TV, they got the worst of the radio, they got the worst of the Hollywood, they got the worst of it all. And Terrence McKenna was supposed to be like the spiritual guide, the guardian of that entire generation, and he sold it all out for his personal, petty, boring little shows. And oh man, I really, really dislike Terrence McKenna so much. It's not just that his voice is like extremely annoying. He is extremely annoying. He radiates extreme annoyance. Like he is. And that's exactly, unfortunately, what Gen X was cursed with. It's just like, you guys are supposed to be the clown generation. Wrong! Vegas sucks! Don't be the Louis the 15th generation, for the love of God, because Louis the 16th couldn't pull it back before the time. Everything was just in absolute chaos and disarray. What the Masons did to Catholicism is really, really sick, and I really want to get into that one day, but it's the same exact playbook that was done to the Boy Scouts. And, I cannot understate how evil the Masons are, how the child-selling Masons have been responsible for almost all of the terrible things you see in America. I cannot understate that. Recently, we've been using CGI as a fantasy billboard. And that's just sick because, it's not like we're watching Beowulf when CGI just came out. We're literally watching CGI projected as, well, this is what you're going to get. And then we watch all the beauty get destroyed, and then nothing is replaced because it was all CGI, fantasy, sold to investors, and then idiot construction workers on opiates. Just clear cut everything, thinking that it would do good. Like, really, don't be a cretin. It's funny, I think QAnon and the K-Hive are probably the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised. It seems to align pretty good, and there's enough time that they could kind of shift, from messing with the red people to messing with the blue people, as the blue guy, reigned over the country for 4 years to the detriment of everybody, including himself. But, in all that, look out for those deadly marijuana spike toxins causing psychosis. And I can't believe people are still trying to push that. People are still trying to push that like people can't do their research. Like, first off, you call it marijuana, you're telling on yourself that you literally don't even know the scientific name for the plant. Marijuana is a term that was invented by, Texas law enforcement. It's not a real thing. It's like calling, anything bloobity blops, and taking yourself seriously. It's cannabis. That's the plant. Cannabis sativa comes from Europe. Cannabis indica comes from India. You got it? It's that simple. It's not toxic. It is not deadly. And you didn't get to make new terms up 300 years ago and ignore the scientific process just because you live out in Texas, buddy. So, really, all the guys who can just lie for no reason need to have a come to Jesus moment. And all the cops that enjoy staying outside of these like festivals and just messing with people really, really hard. They need to stop that shit. That isn't funny. Like when their life flashes before their eyes, they're not going to find that very funny, and they're causing a lot of distress and hatred that does not belong in society. Quite frankly, I don't know the solution to the problem, which is you have to keep borders around these communities so that they don't leak out into the like suburbs where people are raising their children. But you can't screw with people deliberately and torment people and beat people up for no reason. You can't do that. That is bad. That makes you the criminal. And it's funny when you research things because you find out, psychologically, if you parsed enough papers, that cops and criminals have similar aspects to their psychology. And it's funny that Nietzsche had like one good quote, which is two good quotes. You must have chaos on your heart to give birth to a dancing star. That's kind of a good quote, even though it's very poetic and it doesn't really mean anything. But the really, really good quote is, in the process of monsters, make sure you don't find yourself as a monster. In the process of fighting monsters, make sure that you do not find yourself becoming one. Which is to say that you are what you focus on, you are what you put yourself around, and if all you have in your mind is monsters, which don't even correspond to reality, they're out of sync, they're schizophrenic, if you will, they're separated from reality, they're not grounded, then you will become that phantasm, that boogeyman inside of your head, and then you will find yourself becoming the villain, as you did not die a hero. And that's not how it needs to be. That's not how it needs to be. You need to focus your mind. Keep yourself on the straight and narrow. War is actually not a evil thing in particular. That's why there was morals that could have been developed around war. We see a lot of wars in the last 25, 30, 40, 50. I mean, ever since the Kennedy assassination, it's really, really gone downhill. So that's why the Freemasons that helped kill Kennedy and the Teamsters that helped out too, you cruddy little union there that helped kill Kennedy, I hope they regret that, because they really sold out all their own potential thinking that they would get a little payday out of it. War is a warning. That's what it actually means. War is a warning to something worse, to a greater evil. So keep that in mind before you become a pacifist. But also keep in mind that violence begets violence before you become a hyper-patriot. If you read C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, the way that you get people off of the straight and narrow, which is to say focusing on the eternal now and solving their problems right now, is to get people focused on either the far future or the far past. And then to turn people into either a pacifist, focusing on the far future, or a patriot, focusing on the far past. But that's not here and now. That's not have you eaten. That's not have you slept. That's not how have you exercised recently. That's not how you're feeling. That's not how your nutrients. That's not are there any holes in your roof. That's not have you called your mother recently. That's not any of the things that really matter. And speaking of things that matter, we're selling out the future of our entire race, so that our human race, so that we could play Monopoly on a board with bricks, bucks, and Monopoly money, and it's not worth it at all. One thing that genuinely terrifies me, is when Trump says, liquid gold, liquid gold. Like, dude, it's sludge. It's full of horrible, toxic, like, gross, nasty crap that can't just be evaporated. It has to go somewhere. And it's better to be whole in the ground, causing a heat absorbing and fluid distribution layer, than to be hollowed out to the point where that area chasms in and causes just sinkholes in the general area, because we're unearthing millions and millions and millions and millions of years of the earth stacking itself and poking holes in it like we're poking holes in a body, scooping out things. That terrifies me. There has to be a proper way of doing that. It can't just be sloppy, willy-nilly. We already know that from the past. Can't just dredge the oceans to drill down into the seabed. We know for a fact that that causes horrible, horrible consequences, no matter how hard we try. So, I don't want to stress people out too much, but, pray that Trump has a good idea and that the people he contracts these oil things out to are not the same creeps in the Caterpillar construction equipment that have been doing nothing but destroying stuff and putting up like rickety IKEA houses that'll fall down in a strong gust of wind. Like that, you can tell that that's going to end up, if that happens, the same people get contracted. You can tell that it's going to be messy, and it's going to take a long time to clean up. It's going to cost a lot more money to clean up than the money that we make exporting our oil to China or India or whoever. Keep that in mind. So I wanted to wrap up on the animus and the anima because I brought up the alchemical marriage of the mind and the soul one time, and I didn't really explain what that was. And how there are a few alchemical concepts that make the cut and don't get consigned with the rest of the lies. And it's also a very interesting thing in gender sciences that the animus is the mind that is aligned with the male, and the anima is the soul that is aligned with the female, and that in every man there is an anima, which is his inner woman that he projects onto other women very frequently, and sometimes even his mom in edible complexes, which is the only little teeny tiny itty bitty cubic zirconium speck that Freud actually managed to glean. Nothing else. He even took the angels and demons concept and turned it into the superego and id, and it's just the angels and demons on your shoulders. Nothing new at all. He was a thief. But Jung was a real genius, and he was a real beautiful mind. And the animus is the mind inside of women, because women have their souls oftentimes take control, and then they have these cycles that their minds, no matter how much they want, can't really stop, or at least if their minds really focus on stopping, they only like cause stress and pain while pushing back the natural, and that eventually collapses in later on. So the thing that the Baphomet statue is a corruption of is the marriage of each internal animus and anima inside of people, so that the mother knows how to be a good father in the absence of the father, to not corrupt the child's upbringing, and vice versa, in a psychological, not physical way. And it's very, very important in order to raise a child properly to grasp at least a portion of that, because naturally, physically, women have superhuman lower bodies but very weak upper bodies, and men have superhuman upper bodies but very weak lower bodies. And that's very interesting because they physically have dimorphism, and spiritually they have dimorphism, but naturally there is spiritual, and past the body and into the psychology, there isn't actually a physical male and a female representation, but there is representations of the feeling center of the heart and the thinking center of the brain. And so that is why in Celtic societies you have equally ruling kings and queens, but in Germanic societies that lie all the time and build these castles to hide in while their people suffer and tell each other horrific fairy tales, they tend to have a very masculine and male centric and non balanced, non soulful king. So I think that's a good spot to wrap up, and I hope you guys have a good one. Take care.